Hi, everybody. Welcome back. This week we're talking about learning. And here is a basic definition of learning it's the process of acquiring through experience new and relatively enduring information or behaviors. So, in this module, we're going to cover three major learning theories, but what each of them have in common is experience. We learn by seeing or doing, either indirect or direct experience. And so, what first comes to mind when it comes to experience is the theory of behaviorism. Um, Recall that behaviorism is one of the five major perspectives in psychology. So, what are those major perspectives? We have the biological perspective, psychodynamic perspective, humanistic, cognitive, and behaviorism. And so, again, the idea was that to explain human thought and behavior, why do we do and think all the crazy complex things that we do? We need different perspectives, different levels of analysis. And behaviorism really just focused on the surroundings, the context, and how we are influenced by the world around us. There are some behaviorists, in the history of psychology that take this perspective to an extreme degree, and we call them the radical behaviorists. People like John Watson, as you'll read about in the textbook, and you'll also see and read about on Canvas in this module. These radical behaviorists basically argue that humans and other animals, we take a passive role. We sit back and simply react to the world around us. So there's this basic stimulus-response relationship. We know today it's not that simple. We take much more of a contemporary approach in psychology today with what's called social learning theory. And basically what that argues is that in between the stimulus and response relationship, there is cognitive processing. In other words, we actively engage in a processing analysis, based on my memories and expectations of an event. So two people, for example, can react to the same stimulus in different ways because those two people each think about that stimulus in different ways. So, behaviorism is right. We do react to the environment, but it's not just a simple stimulus-response relationship. As you're going to see in this module, we react or act in very complex ways. All right, so briefly, let's just talk about the three major learning theories that we're going to cover in this module. And then as you go forward, you can get more detail on each one of these. So the first is called classical conditioning. Learning to link a biologically potent stimulus with a neutral stimulus and anticipate events. So let's look at a very basic example. Imagine somebody blows in your face. They go, whew, and they blow in your face. A natural reaction is you're going to blink because air coming in, at your eyes causes you to blink. This is a reflex. It's not learned. But what would happen if before somebody blows in your face, they tap you on the shoulder? So they tap you, blow in your face, you're going to blink. Now you're going to blink because they blew in your face, not because they tapped you on the shoulder. However, if they kept repeating this process, in other words, they were pairing the tap on the shoulder with blowing in your face over and over and over again, what do you think would happen if they simply tapped you on your shoulder? Well, more than likely, you're going to learn to blink, because you anticipate that after you got tapped on the shoulder, you're going to have air blown in your face. So being tapped on the shoulder goes from what's called a neutral stimulus to a conditioned stimulus. In other words, we might blink simply as a reaction to being tapped on the shoulder because being tapped on the shoulder is associated with having air blown in your face. So that's classical conditioning. And we're going to look at a lot more real world implications there. This relates to addiction, post-traumatic stress disorder, lots of really interesting implications for classical conditioning. The second major learning theory is operant conditioning. And this is probably a little more straightforward. This is the idea that we learn to associate our behavior with the outcome of those behaviors. If a behavior results in a reward, I'm going to learn to repeat that behavior in order to get more rewards. So, for example, you might work a job that you don't really like very much, but you get paid, every week you receive a paycheck. And that paycheck reinforces your behavior. It increases the likelihood that you're going to show up for work next week in order to get more of those, good things, in this case, money. On the flip side, a punishment is going to reduce the likelihood of a behavior being repeated. So, for example, if you ever, touch a hot stove, that burning sensation makes you, feel pain, but the brain, learns. We learn not to repeat that behavior again in order to avoid those types of, undesirable consequences in the future. So, in a basic summary, rewards and punishments increase or decrease the likelihood of a behavior being repeated. And as you'll see, there's a little more detail to the theory, but that's the basic. That's the basic summary. Finally, we have observational learning or modeling. And this is probably the most, straightforward of all. The textbook uses the phrase monkey see, monkey do. So we imitate the world around us. We imitate those that we trust and admire. From an evolutionary perspective, this is beneficial because, especially when we're children, the people that we trust and admire might have more knowledgeable or useful information. They have knowledge about the world that we want to learn to help us survive. We see this in other animals. Monkeys, for example, baby monkeys, they'll look at the adult monkeys and learn how to use tools. For example, taking rocks to smash open nuts. That's observational learning. A lot of language development in humans is based partly on observational learning. So we will imitate the sounds of our parents as we are growing up. Some of the larger implications that we're going to kind of unpack a little bit are questions like, does violent television cause violence? Seeing violence on TV, where there's a lot of that today, does that cause us to imitate that behavior? Violent video games. Do we imitate the violence that we see in video games? From a strict radical behaviorist perspective, the answer is yes. But of course, we know the world is not that simple. Essentially, what we'll see is that watching violence on TV and watching violence in video games, it changes the way we think about violence. It doesn't necessarily make us violent, but from a basic observational learning perspective, it does change the way we think. All right, so that is learning in terms of these three major theories: classical conditioning, operant conditioning, and observational learning. Continue forward in the module to get more detail on each.